So today I was thinking a little bit about Overwatch and about topics that I haven't heard be covered way too much, and one that I kind of thought about was why everybody hates DPS players, or why it seems like everybody, including other DPS players, hate DPS players as a whole. And I'm not going to talk about, the main easy to hit things, I guess, that, there's more trolls, there's more one tricks, there's more of all that. I kind of want to go into exact reasons why I think people do dislike players playing this role, and I guess why some of those reasons might not be the best to use against them, and I guess why some of them might be decent reasons to use against them as well. I should probably mention that for myself personally, I am not a DPS main, I main tank and support, and I personally don't completely hate DPS mains, but I do find some problems in them, and I will be discussing a lot of those today. So with all that said, let's get started. So I think the first thing I wanted to kind of bring up today was an idea that I think is, kind of hard to comprehend, but I think a very important one. And that is that I believe that a lot of Overwatch players, and I think the majority of people playing Overwatch at this point, believe that a lot of DPS think that they are kind of entitled to their character. Or a lot of DPS players seem kind of privileged with their characters, or anything like that. I think a lot of people just kind of believe that when you're picking up DPS, you think that you are better than other players, and that you deserve the best role that can carry the hardest. And especially when you take this role away from other people, it kind of is a signal that, you think you are the most important. And even though that might not be the case, and even though you might just be playing a character because you enjoy them, or because you think that their playstyle is cool, or because you saw one of your idols playing this character, doesn't matter the reason. I think a lot of people will automatically think that, yes, you're playing this character because you think that you are better than other people. And I think that's kind of a bad stigma that's been going on through the game. And I think that that is not a good reason to hate this role. Sure, sometimes some people do think that they're better than you and they will pick that DPS and will shove it in your face. But I think the majority of cases, that isn't really the way the game works, or isn't really the way that a lot of the players work. A lot of people, again, just want to play who they enjoy. So I wanted to cover that before we go on to some more specific things. And I guess the most specific thing we can talk about right here is personal examples and personal anecdotes. And I think this is where a lot of people kind of start to hate DPS, either from their own examples, their own past things that's happened to them from DPS players doing stuff to them, or from videos that they've watched, because I honestly think that YouTube oftentimes will blow out of proportion the amount of people that are toxic in this role. But I think in general, in the past, a lot of people have experienced some bad problems with DPS, some useless DPS, some insta-locking DPS on their teams, some DPS creating bad team comps, all of that put together. And I think that with just a few bad DPS, or again, just bad experiences with DPS, a lot of people kind of get the general idea that every DPS is going to do this, and every DPS is just as toxic as that last guy. And again, while this can happen, I think that, especially with YouTube again, we do kind of blow it out of proportion. There will always be those scumbags, but they're going to be on every role in every game, kind of no matter what. So I don't think that's necessarily a DPS only problem. Maybe it does show up sometimes more in the DPS role, and that's why more people, kind of do that as DPS. Maybe it's just the way that DPS kind of works, the way that it's more solo oriented, the way that you have to, improve on yourself more than your team. That could maybe be the reason why there's more toxic players in that sense. But I think, again, you shouldn't just kind of judge all of your current DPS based off transgressions of previous DPS. And I especially believe that, yeah, the majority of players are either quiet or just kind of nice, so don't take it too hard if one person out of every 5 games is kind of a jerk to you. And with that out of the way, I guess, let me go to something completely differently, and that is the idea that the majority of players in this game are playing DPS. I think we should all keep that in mind. The majority of just people playing Overwatch like that role, because probably the huge amount of characters, the huge variety, and the focus on getting kills in a shooter game, which a lot of people like to do. But I think one thing that has kind of made a lot of DPS players hate other DPS players, and just kind of everybody hate these players, is that a lot of the times DPS players will have to give up their role. And I think that that actually causes a lot of toxicity, because when you have to give up your role and give it to someone else that's either playing a similar character or even maybe the exact same character that you main, well, first off, you hate giving up that role, but second off, you also will be able to easily see what that person is doing badly and easily see their faults. Personally, for myself, I barely ever have to give up tank and barely have to give up support. It almost never happens, so I don't really have to see a lot of other supports that took my job that are doing worse than me. But as DPS, that will often happen, and that will often kind of make you angry at the current player that essentially stole the role that you wanted to play. I think that's just kind of a thing that will cause a lot of anger for people towards DPS players. And that's why you see so many people that had their role stolen being so toxic in game and yelling at the DPS so often, and why it seems like so often people just hate you whenever you pick up this role. I think it's because people are more apt to judge your gameplay because there's more people playing the same role that you are playing right now. And I'm not going to say that's a good or bad thing, that's just kind of how it is, and that's maybe why you might be judged a little bit more than a bad tank player or a bad support player, because less people know what they should be doing, and less people are vying for the role in the first place, so there's kind of that. And I guess another thing that I should mention about, the relative ease of judging DPS players, I think that there's one thing in this game that makes it so easy to judge a DPS compared to everything else, and that is that DPS have one job that's relatively easy to track. DPS have to get damage, get kills, and that's it. And you can look at the damage at the bottom of the screen at any time. You can see who's dying at the top right of the screen at any time, and if your DPS is not helping in that, it's very easy to see, hey, our DPS is useless this game. Let's blame him, let's tell him he's bad, whatever. But with other roles, that's not really the case. I mean, with tank, they are there to create space. What is space? How do you keep track of space? How do you use space? How do you tell when a tank's doing good or bad? Of course, you can tell the difference between a great and a terrible tank, but it's a lot harder to tell, and there's less people vying for the role, less people knowing what they should even be doing in the first place. I think all that together makes so that, of course, you get more flame as DPS than tank. And as well with support, as support, you can be pretty bad, but just consistently heal people and just kind of stay in the back line, not do way too much, and you still do at least a okay amount for your team. Well, again, as DPS, I think it's going to be a lot easier to be seen as completely useless, because as support, you're at least healing, you're at least helping in that way, especially if you're Lucio or something. Maybe you're not getting any kills, maybe you're not doing any plays, maybe you're not doing barely anything, but at least you have some healing. With DPS, you can't even supply that, and if you aren't supplying your damage and if you aren't supplying your kills, it kind of makes sense to why people may not like you, because in that case it feels like you're not really supplying anything to the team at all, and they'd probably want you to switch to something else so that someone else that's better at that role could pick up that character and help their team in that way. And I guess the thing that's kind of talking about, supplying stuff to help your team, I think that I often talk about, honestly, but I should mention here, is that I think a lot of people kind of have overly high expectations for DPS and kind of expect for them to do more for their team than they really should, especially depending on their rank. Your silver or gold or platinum or diamond or whatever DPS shouldn't be doing as well as somebody like Aimbot Calvin. They shouldn't be getting as much damage out, shouldn't be getting as much elims, and a lot of the other roles, I think, gain more prevalence kind of depending on the rank, and especially DPS. I think a lot of people kind of see that DPS should be doing everything, they should be carrying that game, and when they kind of fall back and can't do that, I think a lot of people just kind of assume that DPS are failing comparatively. When you see a tank not doing that well or a support not doing that well, you can kind of think, hey, whatever, it's a support role, it's a tank role, they really aren't meant to carry the game, they're just meant to help out their teammates. And even though they have the possibility to carry, it's not really expected. But with DPS, there are high expectations. People do expect you to do a lot, and even if they don't expect you to play, God tier, they at least expect you to play really, really well, which I think is a good thing in one way, because it does make you want to play better, it does make you play to improve, and you probably will have to improve a lot faster than the other roles, but it will cause a lot more flame towards you until you are really, really good for your rank. And that's something I guess you just kind of have to deal with. And the final thing I'm going to mention here kind of, I guess, correlates to the last thing very well, and that is that when you're playing DPS, of course, you are going to get the most hate out of any role. That just kind of makes sense, because it has the most carry potential, again, because it has the most potential to impact the game, but as well, you have to remember that you do have the most potential to get the most praise as well. Of course, sometimes as tank, you could get a nasty ult as Reinhardt and maybe get some praise there, or sometimes you could get a super good time to ult as Lucio, but those times are far and few in between. But playing DPS, you have almost every single game with most of the DPS characters a chance to do well, to get praised for doing well, and that's something you might want to keep in mind. Of course, there will be more hate towards you, but there will be more praise towards you as well. And don't forget about that when you are getting flamed, because, you do dislike the bad stuff, but there is some good stuff with that as well. And I think, honestly, that's often forgotten by a lot of DPS players. There is some good in this for you for playing these characters, and you could even argue more good than playing a lot of the other characters. But anyways, as always, guys, that's the only stuff I have to say about this topic, about why it seems like so many people hate DPS players. You know, I'm not particularly for or against it, just kind of wanted to go over the main information I could think about and kind of explain why I think most people think a certain way. With all that said though, guys, thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like or press the subscribe button to see more videos like this in the future. And as always, guys, thank you all for watching. It's pizza time, and have a wonderful day.